Hello, and welcome to Enhanced Information Solutions webinar on Citgo's Lamont Refinery's OT cybersecurity journey. I'm Jack Audie, EIS's Director of Sales, and your host for this webinar. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. After a quick introduction and a poll, Joe Cody will describe the EIS Cyber. And then BC will then go in to describe the cybersecurity initiatives at Citgo along with the results. You can ask questions at any time. We will share the responses at the end. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will post a survey. I ask you to please complete the survey to help us improve our webinars. So before we get started, here are some Zoom basics. You'll see a little icon that says Q&A. To ask questions, please click on the Q&A icon. We will answer your questions either in the dialogue or at the end of the webinar, but we will review them at the end. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be presented with a survey. Please complete the survey so we can properly gauge the value of the engineered solution, so we can properly gauge the value of this webinar. Today's speakers. Today we have Joe Cody. Joe is EIS's Director of EIS Cyber. He has over 20 years experience in industrial networking, control systems, and cybersecurity. We have BC Spear. BC has 20 plus years experience in refining, chemicals, PI, and cybersecurity. BC also heads the OT cybersecurity initiative at Citgo Lamont Refining. Before we get started, let's take a quick poll. I'm going to post the results of the poll to the webinar. How many connections are there between your IT and local OT networks? Well, about a third of you do not know, and about another third have more than 6. Citgo has 2 connections between IT and local OT networks. If a cyber attack were detected on your IT network, how long would it take you to isolate the IT and OT networks? Well, according to this, 39% of you would isolate your networks in less than 2 hours, another 39% in 2 to 5 hours, 6% would need more than a day to isolate your IT and OT. Citgo can isolate their IT and OT networks in less than 2 hours. How often are your OT systems, including operating systems and applications, patched against vulnerabilities? 28% of attendees never patch or only with system upgrades. 39% patch monthly, and Citgo patches continuously with no longer than 1 month between patches. What percentage of your OT systems are protected by some kind of anti-malware, antivirus software? Include Windows Defender only on Windows 10 and Server 2016 or later. Well, 22% of attendees have endpoint protection on less than half of your OT assets and systems. Citgo protects 100% of their systems and assets. If your OT systems were compromised by ransomware, what percentage of your infrastructure could you recover from a backup? Well, more than half of you can recover more than 75% of your OT systems from backups. 11% of you, along with Citgo, can recover 100% of your systems from backups. That's pretty good. How often do you test your backups? Well, half of you test your backups annually, a third never test your backups, and Citgo tests their backups semi-annually. All right, thank you very much. So who is Enhanced Information Solutions? We were founded 26 years ago in Stillwater, Minnesota. We provide MES consulting and implementation services, PI services, OT cybersecurity, and we also have 2 products. We have eDataSheet. This is a new product for manual entry of data into PI. If you have PI and you're familiar with PI Manual Logger and it's become a little long in the tooth, well, eDataSheet was built to fix that. We also have an Ops Tracker product. Ops Tracker product is an electronic logbook with workflow and complete audit trail. EIS is a global company. We have offices in the US, Toronto, Canada, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Dublin, Ireland, Mannheim, Germany, Pune, India, and Istanbul, Turkey. Well, we have over 20 plus years of PI expertise and provide traditional PI services, as well as these following services. Joe, could you describe a little bit about EIS Cyber?
Sure. Thanks, Jack. So as Jack mentioned, I'm Joe Cody. I head up the cyber team here at EIS. We offer a variety of OT-centric services around industrial networking, cybersecurity. Probably one of the key pieces there is the industrial networking. So in that area, we look to help with network segmentation, development of DMZs, an organization of your OT networks into logical segmentation that really makes sense from a security and data flow perspective. And then the cybersecurity itself, there's a number of services we offer, everything ranging from simple assessments all the way up to full penetration testing. And then a hot service right now, largely based on the maturity level of a lot of people's cybersecurity programs, is patch management, right? And that covers everything from setting up automated patch products like WSUS to actually coming in and doing the vendor approvals, checking with vendors to make sure that patches can be deployed, and then actually getting those patches out. Next slide, please. So what is this webinar about? Back in late 2021, we held a webinar based on protecting OT assets from ransomware. And if you weren't there, it's not a problem. But one of the things we kind of highlighted in that webinar was 3 key areas that we thought were very important in defending not just against ransomware, but all types of cyber threats. And those were network architecture, patch management, endpoint protection, and then disaster recovery. And to kind of show that we practice what we preach, we asked BC Spear from Citgo to come in and kind of talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing in these 3 areas, dating all the way back to 2013, which even predates BC a little bit. And so BC is going to talk to you guys a bit about the work that we've done out there, what he likes and doesn't like about having EIS, and how we've really helped them on their cybersecurity initiative. So BC, can you take over and take us the rest of the way home?
Yeah, sure. So a little brief cut. So Citgo Lamont is it's a medium-sized refinery. It's a little west of Chicago. It's about a little less than 180,000 barrels a day and about 95,000 gallons or barrels per day of gasoline. So it is a decent sized facility. It's about 1,100 acres. Next slide. Just roll through. I do have a number of slides here, and we're going to roll through them pretty quickly. You do get the whole slide deck, and the recording will be posted for you guys to get it. So you should be able to go back, and if you have any questions, you can, get in contact with Joe or myself. Contact information is at the end. So we started off the systems didn't used to have any networks at all, and then I've been around long enough that they started coming with network ports, and we started plugging stuff in with no thought about how to connect it and and we had a lot of piecemeal stuff where you've got networks connected for PLCs, you've got networks connected for vibration monitoring, you got, part of the DCS and, something to PI and no real concept of a whole system. And then we were helped along by a very nice audit that came from internally that suggested that we should change our design. So if we move on a couple of slides here. So to start with, we had just a simple control network with lots of different pieces connected together. We had some collection nodes off of the DCS that went up to PI. We had an APC system that was connected within the network. We had some of the Emerson AMS products that we were using, and we just had things like strung out. So next. Next. So you can see a lot of stuff that we had connected. So this is kind of our starting point. where we started looking at a control system and saying, we have at the top here the IT business network, and we'd separate that from a firewall and begin setting up networks to connect everything underneath. We put together a couple of different main ones to us. Our most critical is the process control domain, and the rest, which obviously holds our control systems. And the left is what we call the business partner domain. It's kind of some third-party applications and different stuff that we do provide some access to the applications to folks on the IT domain. We do not have any kind of access to the process control side, with the exception of data flow in and out to Pi. So you can see that we also have additional firewalls put in for each of our three control systems, which we use Emerson's Delta V product. So we did have the green you will see commonly called to process control network. We do have a separate firewall through each of those. Next, that was our starting point. We brought in the outside consultants, which Joe worked closely with the design and the folks here at the site. That was a year to 2 years before I actually came on board, that they got this all set up and working. And before I came, using the zone and conduit method, new networks were created and existing networks better defined. So that meant things like Bentley, Nevada, PLCs were brought together and connected underneath the firewalls, you know, as a more defined system. Forward. It was upgraded. We put in a domain and established some rules. You know, no remote access from the IT business network. Any potential access to the firewall must be within locked doors. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. We tried to consolidate some of the DMZ and the business partner network. We made that split. We set up jump boxes, which was a specific computer on the IT business side that we use to access any of the applications on the business partner side. Again, we don't allow any access to the DCS side from the business network. All of our locations for our automation and controls team are in more secured locations. That we provided workstations that are on the DMZ, and we allow nothing from the DCS through the DMZ to the business network. We manage it from the DMZ. Next slide. We set up some dedicated storage network arrays for backup and recovery of all of the computers in the system. The Delta V can access that on its own unrestricted. Everything else kind of goes through a series of firewalls for access. Next slide. Then it kind of was the starting point. We got a system in place. It became workable. This is more the time frame that I came on over at Citgo. And one of the things you'll notice that this wasn't like a quick, this is like a road, a kind of we took a considerable journey to get where we are today. We started to look at issues and prioritize things and start to look at the functionality that we wanted to the network. And that's where we say phase 2 begins. We had some things like we needed remote access for vendors at times to look at the systems to help with diagnostics. We had separate licensing for different sides of things. We have a lot of different systems. Next slide, please. So we began to, develop the systems more. It's come in. This is about the point we added what is essentially another DMZ zone is at the top underneath the firewall, but that allows us a common point in the OT environment to administer and manage the systems from both sides. you'll see to the left, we have the BPN, or the business partner network, where we have a couple segregated networks there. We segregate things as necessary based upon functionality. So if things don't need to be grouped together, then we don't group them together. We put them on their own kind of network, and then we have them communicate with whatever they need to communicate with, but we don't just openly dump everything into the same bucket. You'll see on the DCS side, we have additional firewalls, and again, firewalls for each of the 3 separate areas that we use for process control network. We developed other sub-networks for things like network management and collecting asset information and logs, and then the PCM computers that we use for access, testing and development system, which we'll talk a little bit in a minute. If you go to the next slide. We did replace, we had Emerson smart firewalls. They're good tools to put in if you don't have the skill set or the knowledge to do something more, or you're satisfied with the functionality that they provide. We decided that we needed to do more than that. So we went with a redundant pair of Cisco security devices, upgraded the switches. This helped us out a lot with uptime, with speed on the network, because we went from 100 megabit system to a gigabit system. We put the redundancy in. As of the webinar, Joe got his calculator out and figured out we've been up over 1,400 days as a pair. We could do maintenance on either one by shutting the other one down. And so we haven't had any downtime of the network since we started that redundancy. Next. We did need some access for diagnostic purposes, and at one point the way we did that is we used to take the contractor's laptop and plug it into our network, our control network, and then we just used his wireless card to connect to the outside of the internet, and that's how we provided temporary troubleshooting for the vendors to get in. We decided, well, we commonly do that, and so we put together a dedicated procedure. We decided that anything we do should be more defined. We put together a procedure. We developed a separate network. We put a computer in. We physically disconnect that computer, but we put a procedure in on how to connect it and how to get people in, and then get the diagnostic information we want, and then how to turn everything off and pull the cables back out so that access is temporary and then air gapped 99% of the time. But any activity such as that, we decided we need to be more formal, get a procedure, do it the right way, than just kind of bypass everything we worked hard to put in from cybersecurity. So next, please. Phase 1, we had dedicated switches. We put additional switches in, different levels of switches. We started breaking the network up into more pieces. Next. Same, we put in management networks, started collecting information and data. Next. We added the WSUS, which is the the capability to update all of the Microsoft systems and provide patch. We put in the McAfee endpoint protection and put that up on the system. We wanted to do more things, more functionality, add things a little at a time. Obviously, the amount that we're doing here, there's a stepped process. We don't have the resources. You don't have enough people to get this all done at the same time. So we're slowly adding things, starting to have a vision of where we would like to go and the things that we would like to do, and just moving forward. Next. So we mentioned the OTDMZ in the picture. Most of the things start to become centralized on the OTDMZ because it can be used to administer either the VPN or the PCN from a single network. We're using it for the endpoint protection and to update the virus scans on the different networks, the patch manage it from the WSUS, the collection of inventory and assets, the backup and recovery services, any of the licensing that we need to do can be done from that area. Next. Additionally, there's no OEM systems. There's some intrusion and detection. We're still protected by our firewall. We don't have any active domain trust between us and IT or anywhere or within the different networks internally. We do everything directly point to point. Our networks are all completely isolated by default, and we define any connections specifically by port and by computer. Anytime we need a flow of data between one subnet and the other, or between anything within the OT networks and the IT business network. Next. Next. You are see that there's several slides here. So let's stop here and see if you had any questions about where we are at the network architecture. We started with something basic and it continues to progress. We have, we've got something we think is secure. You've got to keep changing it to make sure it's secure. You've got to keep monitoring it, and you've got to keep, we're continuing it to add functionality.
BC, can you hit on real quick the network isolation? You kind of went past that.
I flipped it. So our network isolation, at first glance, looking at our network, it looks kind of complex. But if you understand the functionality that we built it to provide, then it kind of comes up pretty simple. We essentially group everything together by stuff that needs to do, and then we separate it out. We also have the capability to shut our system off at any time. We put some big red cables in on the networks and put big yellow tags on them, and then trained like 24-hour personnel and the ship supervisor that said, hey, if we call you up, come down here and pull these two big red wires out. That isolates in our area of criticality. The control system is obviously the most important thing to us, and continuing to operate the plant safely, and kind of almost that as our PI system and our data collection systems underneath that. And then everything else in the third party and the reliability and the collection of that's kind of the lowest tier in there. But we can, with the pull of those cables, quickly isolate the control system and continue to safely operate the plant without any connection to anywhere. So that provides us that backup. So if we see a problem, we can pull the plug quickly.
Okay. So there was other questions about that in previous sessions. People were talking about how do we strike a balance between security and simplicity, and you seem to have done this pretty well. Are you concerned that the network architecture has grown overly complicated, right? Or do you feel that EIS has done a satisfactory job of balancing both the complexity and ease of use?
No, I think that they're well balanced between the two. I mean, we're able to maintain the system, and we have the network connections. We have all the network that we need for that. We've maintained the data transfer, but we haven't seen any increase in our ability to use it easily. And we get a lot of support from EIS, it fits within our philosophy to use contractors, because we just don't think it provides a lot of efficiency or value for us to develop that expertise internally. We provide a little bit of contact support and guidance, and we certainly try to stay engaged in what's going on. But it's just not effective for us to try to provide that expertise internally and keep people trained to perform a lot of that functionality.
Okay. All right. Talk about patch management and endpoint protection.
Next slide. Yeah, sure. So we did have some endpoint protection, but it was kind of random. It's just, you know, you bring somebody in every once in a while and bring a flash drive and pop it in and update some of the virus stuff, but it wasn't done on a routine basis. Next. This was, I mean, the audit of how we did this was part of the things that kicked off our initiative in the first place. Next slide. We had Symantec before on the Delta V zones and through Emerson, and we put additional licenses to cover the BPM and the PCM or other networks. So there were 5 different areas that cover our DCS zones and then the 2 upper levels. Next. So at first we were all just put a flash drive on, it downloads, do each of the machines once a month, maybe on a semi-monthly basis. There's some little bit of hardening processes in place, but we were still pretty manual. Next. Obviously, there's some issues with this. We aren't very regular about, I mean, travel requirements and different things and getting people out on a routine. It ends up not being routine, not being regular. And then, you know, some issue comes up or something goes on, there's no patching going on at all because nobody comes out to do it. Next. We did put in 18 is when we put the OTDMZ in. We went to the McAfee endpoint protection. And that was really just because of this, because it made it easier for us to put in an automation system that we could maintain the virus definitions through the network and keep everything up to date. We put templates in place on the Delta V on the 3 networks. All of the McAfee EPO logs are sent into a SolarWinds SIEM, information and event monitoring system for analysis and alerting. We began to, you'll see this on the OTDMZ, we started to collect logs. We started to look at the SIEM information. We started to look at things that weren't into the event logs on the different systems. We can, next slide. We also started the patch management. That's about the time frame that we started moving a lot of our systems, trying to upgrade to a most recent version. If you're familiar with Microsoft and how different it was the Windows 10 environment, we still have a lot of systems that are old here. We get a lot of applications that were built for equipment that you know, was bought in the 80s and the 90s, and the application software isn't up to date, won't run on updated systems. You know, we still have a couple of those Windows 95 for workgroup type computers, Server 2003 kind of applications that we just can't update. But the majority, we look to go to Windows 10. And if you go to Windows 10, you have to start patching. You have to keep them up to date. It's a much more daunting task. And the OTDMZ allowed us to start centralizing that on the OTDMZ, setting up the US server, and starting to pass that down to the computers. Next. WS just mentioned that. Next. It gets stuff, WS gets the updates for Microsoft, we pass it down. There is also, we do I don't think I mentioned it. So we do have an Emerson Delta V control system. We do not give direct, EIS doesn't provide direct support of that. We do have contractor support from the vendor for that system itself, but EIS does coordinate heavily with that activity. We get information from Emerson on what patches can be applied to the system that they've tested to make sure that they work properly with the control system. EIS does maintain the firewalls and the networks that feed the control system, but the actual control system and its operating systems, we do use another, but they do integrate quite heavily. The WSUS gets the updates from Microsoft, passes them down from the IT network to the WS and our distributor from there. Next. Everything's mostly upstream for the WSUS. Next. Next. Kind of running short on time. So the SUS is there. We run it from the top. It's certainly made life easier for patch management. And we've got a couple shortcomings still. We're still manually updating some of the virus. Similar. WS only covers the Microsoft patches. So we have a lot of other stuff, a lot of applications where we have really old stuff that is still there. Some of it is resource oriented. We don't get from the vendors and the third-party software. They don't upgrade their applications. Typically, you will ask if it will run under Windows 7 or 10, and they just say, we don't know. So we have to test some of that as we put on a new operating system, and it just takes us a while to do it. So we've got some older applications that still rely on manual updates. We've got other applications that don't come through the SUS, so we still have to accomplish that. But it was usually helpful to get that WS put in. Next. Mitigate some of our stuff. We do run quarterly vulnerability assessment. We use what's called Nessus Professional. I use the word we a lot. We involves Joe and his team doing a lot of work. I should point that out. They come in and help us with this. They run the assessment. We review the results together. Helps us look at vulnerabilities and just simply things that can be that aren't fully configured and set up. That makes us looking at some of those and looking at the logs that we put in for cybersecurity actually has allowed us to collect a lot of information that allows us to look at things and go, oh, hey, something's broken, something's not quite configured correctly. And that's helped us out a lot in our reliability and getting everything to talk cleanly to everything else and just make us generally more robust than what we were before. Not really vulnerability concerns at all, just getting everything working right. Next. So this is an example of the Nessus database, and Joe was kind enough to put together this on a system that he uses for tests. This isn't actually our test data. We didn't really want to stick our IP addresses up here. This is what Joe does with his spare time at home. So this is his home network. That's why you see all of the critical and high issues, is because it wouldn't be a very good test if he didn't have stuff to find. So this is what comes out of. There are some detailed reports on each of these types of critical, high, medium. Joe filters them out, sees which one is a problem, and we discuss them in terms of, how do we get them fixed? What do we do about them? Resource development management. Next.
So, so BC. So there were some questions from previous presentations. Have you had any issues with a patch getting pushed down that messed up your system? All right. Do you ever worry about that? And does EIS seem to pay attention to that kind of thing?
So Yes, I mean, so we certainly worry about that kind of thing. I mean, I think everybody in this business has had the issue where we go to fix something and we make it worse. And some of the patches you get from vendors or Microsoft are the same thing. Uh, we did, if you think back a few slides, we did put together a network that's for testing development. EIS has been very good about Joe and his team have the right kind of background. A lot of times the OT side of things, looks a lot like IT, but it really isn't quite IT. There's a lot of special things about it, and his team had the background. So everything we put in place, certainly on the more critical side, we're more 100%. And checking everything out. On the DCS side, we wait for the vendor to okay the patches before we apply them. We're applying and checking everything, installation and the testing and development environment before we put it on, trying to make sure that we're not providing. And as we mentioned, we've got full sets of backups and everything to, if we were to do anything, but we haven't. We've Joe and his team been successful in testing everything out before we put it in place, and we haven't had any problems. As I said, we have over 1,400 days. What is that? Approaching 3 years that we haven't had any types of reliability issues on our system. So.
Okay. Also, have you found the endpoint protection policies to be overly restrictive, or do they cause too much of a burden on your operations and engineering people?
No, I mean, because so for the most part, they're automated. Like I said, we have some older systems and things. So that's where we're moving to is trying to make it easy. So we're not using resources. I've got about, say, 8 people, give or take, contracted supporting, doing automation stuff. And the objective is they're control engineers, they're automation people. They should be out automating, they should be earning their dollars and doing network and updating patches and virus definition files and stuff isn't providing any value. It's a requirement. It's needed for the reliability, but that's not where we should have them spending their time. So no, it's been great.
Okay. And I know Joe and his team are pretty good about soliciting feedback and responding. So you mentioned that you use SolarWinds for SIEM. Do you worry about using their stuff after that 2020 breach?
Oh, no. I mean, I would tell you that anybody makes mistakes, and I might have made 1 or 2 in my career, but haven't had any difficulty with it. Our network is pretty protected, and I mean, also, when anything like that happens, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we have a relationship with EIS. And if anything like that goes on in the wider world, we look at everything in the network and every issue that's provided, and I can be pretty sure if anything major happens, I'm going to get a response from an unsolicited response for Joe within 24 hours. Explaining what the issue is and if there's anything that we need to do here. And we didn't have any problems or difficulty, and looked like they get it all fixed, and we're quite happy using the software. There's some good functionality in the tools we get from SolarWinds and reasonable cost. So it's helped us a lot.
Okay, thanks.
You can flip through this a little bit. This is part of our next slide, audit findings. So I mean, we're coming up on the end here, so I won't spend too much time in this. I think everybody's aware that you need a good backup and restore strategy. We have a primary location within our machine room. We have a location that's like a little over 3/4 of a mile to the north. It's still in the site, but we were able to convince ourselves that that's technically a separate location. We have a backup SAN there. We can back up anything to both systems. Next slide. We've continued to work on that. We probably will still continue to work on that. Next slide. I mean, we have a system. What we have with the OT/DMZ is assisted with that, and how we manage things and put stuff in backups is helpful, and it has progressed. Next slide. All the Delta V zones are still attached. We're using Acronis as the backup tool that we use. So there's some legacy system in place. We have some new software versions of it. Next. New procedures, new inception. We've advanced. We update some of the email server. Next.
All right, so would you feel confident? These are, again, some questions that we have posted in the past. Would you feel confident you could restore enough of your OT infrastructure to avoid having to pay to unlock your data?
Yes. I apologize. I went through that really fast, but I think mostly the backup recovery has progressed. We have a totally capability to get our data backed up. A lot of our environment is virtual. We can restore the machines from image if necessary. We have backups of all the hard drives. We have backups of data. If we were to, we would lose, within the last day or something or other. But I'm very comfortable that we could get our system restored if necessary in that situation. So, I mean, you've just got to have good backup and be prepared for any kind of recovery.
Okay. Along those lines, do your operations people or engineers complain about the performance due to backup operations? I mean, have we minimized the impact of network intensive operations like this?
I doubt they even realize that we do backups. So, they don't notice it.
That's a good sign.
Yeah. Opportunities for improvement. We're on well, I mean, you can see that from the presentation. I mean, we're on improvement. I mean, everybody's got to do that. I mean, this is not something that you can do a project and be done with it. Almost anything these days takes a lot of assets and, some type of path and some type of vision to where you're going and what you want to do. Everything. I mean, everybody's still very happy with their software and their license management is still a pain and how you deal with that. If you do anything with Microsoft, that Microsoft thinks your networks are totally open and that every computer is connected to the World Wide Web so that they can install and monitor all their licenses to get their chunk of flesh. I mean, and then, since they're the king of business models, sometimes every vendor we get looks the same to me. Some of you who said you were air gapped, we're the same air gapped. I'm sure you get that conversation where they just don't understand that your system doesn't hook to the internet. We're looking at anything and everything that's coming out, the applications on cybersecurity and everything else. There's a new product and new capabilities every day. So we're trying to keep a handle on that, most efficient use of resources, all of that kind of stuff. So next. Update more tasks. Yeah, as we go along, the more that we can update, the more time it saves us, the better it is. So the other things you'll see down there, remote access. So we still have a couple of like TeamViewer VNC things that we use here and there. Some of us that's how the people were trained and used it to begin with. And we haven't had the time to go back out and train them to do something different. You want to look at other things. There's some possibility that we have some better improvement with some of the data lake opportunities where we throw it on one side and encrypted traffic and be able to pull it out on the other side and make access simpler and don't have to use a lot of remote access. But, that's where there's a lot of looking forward to what we can make better efficiencies of. Next. other stuff. So EIS is kind of our backup. I think someone asked in the previous pointed out. So we do have a full-time person, almost full-time person from IT that functionally helps out in the OT area, and then we have a regular appearance by EIS to look at logs and check to make sure every function. We like to think of that as a week per month, but then we put other projects in. EIS helps us with our PI and our PI upgrades and you know, activities like that, and some of our system management and you know, Joe's a guru of OPC. We use a lot of OPC communication for third-party systems, so we utilize that. So we have a number of other projects that at the moment we think the week for maintenance and our base level is a week for maintenance and a week for process a month. So we're about half time. We have, you know, probably about enough work for about 3 FTEs. So, but nobody has those kinds of resources. So we get in whatever we can talk management into. Next.
Okay.
We have 2 different virtualization systems. So EIS has helped us put those up in place. A development and testing system for our Delta V. We have a virtual system that is for testing and development our control system. They've helped us put that system together and maintain it. It's also just, you know, a good job of coordinating, right, between the engineers and parts pieces of the folks that are here, and the full-time person is just helping us provide coordination to what all we're working on within our networks. Next.
We're getting a little close on time here.
Yeah, so it's like so next. There are lots of other projects, good opportunities. You can flip through here. Results.
I would like to, we could describe the results. I mean, we started off with why we started it and what are the results so far.
As we've discussed, we have much better reliability and uptime, communication. We're significantly reduced exposure with putting it in, separating, monitoring. We have improved visibility, better ability to diagnose.
Let's do this. Let's do this. We had a couple of, there was some questions. There was one question in particular. Let's just see what Sarah asked, who manages and administers the services and servers in the OT DMZ, IT or OT resources?
So I think I went through that briefly, but we do have an IT resource that reports to me functionally. So we have an FTE there, and then myself and the other automation engineers have, I would say, not more than 5% of our time that we spend on there, and then the other portion really comes from EIS.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
All right, here are some of the questions that came on during the webinar. While the webinar was proceeding, some of this was just answered by BC. Does Citgo have a dedicated team for OT, separate from IT? If so, what is the size of the team? Is it dedicated to Lamont or a central Citgo-wide team? And BC said, no, EIS provides the OT services. Lamont's automation group has some overlap, but there is no dedicated OT group. All right. Can you elaborate what the Delta V zone 1, 2, and 3 are? Are those Delta V level 1, 2, and 3 or something else? And the answer is Citgo's Lamont process control footprint is large enough that they have such 3 separate Delta V zones. They are called zones by Emerson. As such, we call them Delta V zones 1, zones 2, and zones 3. How does Citgo reduce the risk of unauthorized writes from ACM to field IO? We primarily use what is provided by the vendor. The biggest security protection around the control system is physical, with locked cabinets. Does the Lamont refinery self-sustain along with EIS, all the patching, AV, backup, etc., independent of the larger Citgo enterprise, or does Citgo have a centralized patching abilities? Lamont handles into the rest of Citgo. There are several corporate initiatives underway that may change that however. With the Active Directory not connected to any outside network, what has Lamont implemented around lockouts and account password recovery? There are local domains, BPN, PCM, OT, DMZ, etc., with both EIS and local Lamont domain admins. Do changes to firewalls either inside of the DMZ require approval from all stakeholders, OT, IT, and likely a consultation with EIS or OEM? EIS is the only party that makes changes to the OT firewalls. We have documentation to make the changes. No changes made without consulting the automation and operations group. For changes that need to go to citgo.com, a matching rule has to exist on the IT 5545 firewalls. So there's an additional request that must be submitted. Is there a SIEM deployment inside of Delta V, or is the EPO logs to software accomplishing this adequately? EPO to software handles Delta V. We are also looking at adding Delta V SIEM. Who manages, administers the servers and services at the OT DMZ, IT or OT resources? OT fully manages the OT DMZ. The IT group has designated a resource who helps out, but EIS and Lamont's OT group has ultimate responsibility for everything below the IT 5545 firewalls. All right. Thank you very much. We're going to proceed on.
Thank you, BC. That was very, very helpful. Joe, where do you recommend next steps?
Thanks, BC, for your presentation. Really and truly, for pretty much everybody, the next step is our system assessment. It's got a couple of key deliverables in there. Number one is to identify the assets that would be part of the cyber program. It also helps us determine what your current cyber maturity level is. Everybody's at a different point. Some people have good grasp of their asset management. Some people are already starting to do a little bit of patching. We want to figure out where you're at. And with those assets in place and looking at your current maturity level, we can kind of figure out what the low-hanging fruit is. Where are we going to get the best value for your investment? And we do everything really against standard templates. Usually the NIST cybersecurity framework is what we work off of. And then similar documentation out of the NIST special publications or ISA documents. We can work off of the IT-based documents, make those to work as well. And once we get that in place, we can actually help you work up the justifications for that. One of the things we use a lot is a tool called the ROSI, or the Return on Security Investment. It's just a way of taking preventing something from happening, an insurance metric, and converting that into an ROI, something that your business leaders and your financial folks are used to seeing. So that's really the best step, is just let's come in and take a look at where you're at. And as BC's brought up before, it's one of the things we can do is just sit down and have a conversation with you and let you understand kind of broadly, what we think the approach is and what that budgetary number is going to look like, so that you can start, prepping your management team or your upper levels for that. BC hinted on earlier too, is that, we've been doing this work out at Citgo for the better part of 10 years. We get that, not everybody's got a couple of million laying around to do project work on. And so part of this is figuring out the phases, the approach to doing this, and putting it together in such a way that it's palatable for everybody involved.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So if you have any questions or comments or additional information, you can reach out to Joe Cody Here's his contact information, BC Spear, or you can reach out to me, jack@eisinc.com. Now, I do want to thank you all for attending. Thank you, BC. And at the end of the webinar, please take the survey, and that will help us to improve our future webinars. We are recording this, and we will send you all a copy of that recording. All right. Thank you very much, and you all have a nice day.
Thanks again, BC. Thanks, Jack.
Bye now.
Thanks, Joe.